Welcome to Chapter 10. We're getting into the muscular system, and the muscular system, we focus on skeletal muscle, which this man, you can see his muscles. Most athletes have well-defined muscles for their skeletal muscle, but we will focus also, or we will, I shouldn't say focus, touch upon cardiac and smooth muscle as well. So here are the three types of muscle. A is skeletal muscle, B is smooth, and C is cardiac muscle. They have certain similarities and they have many differences. So skeletal muscle is voluntary. It's the only voluntary muscle we have, which means we control it. The nervous system has to innervate that muscle, and the nervous system is what tells the muscle to move, and it's under conscious control. It is multinucleate, and the cells are very long, and they are striated. Smooth muscle is under involuntary control of the nervous system. Cells are fusiform in shape, and the nuclei are also fusiform in shape. So fusiform, think of a cat's eyes. That's kind of the way the cells look. It's smooth in appearance because it doesn't have the same protein fibers running in the same direction as our skeletal muscle has. The nuclei are, there's only one nucleus per cell, which makes it very different from your skeletal muscle. It is the only muscle that is able to undergo mitosis. And then we have cardiac muscle at the bottom. Cardiac muscle is striated like skeletal muscle. It has the same protein fibers running in the same directions, which is why they look similar. Cardiac muscle is typically singly or binucleate. So it doesn't have multiple nuclei, but sometimes it will have up to two. It has special little discs within it called intercalations. These intercalated discs contain desmosomes and gap junctions to allow the cell to communicate and to protect the cell as well. Cardiac muscle is involuntary, so it's not under voluntary control. We don't get to tell our heart to beat. It's branched, which is something you can see in the picture. And it does not need nervous innervation. So skeletal and smooth need nervous innervation. Cardiac muscle is innervated by the nervous system, but the nervous system does not tell it to beat. The nervous system just controls or helps in controlling how fast the heart beats or how slow the heart beats. So what is the function of muscle in a nutshell? The main function that muscle has is movement. So movement of blood through the body, the heart contracts, that's cardiac muscle. Movement of food through the body, our esophagus, our stomach, our intestines contract, the muscles contract, move materials around. But we also have and then movement of the body as a whole, which is skeletal muscle. As a byproduct of movement, second law of thermodynamics states that if you change energy from one form to another, you lose energy as heat. So we also produce heat. So muscle helps in thermoregulation in warming the body up when we need to be warmer, which is why you shiver when you are cold. Skeletal muscle has special functions that cardiac and smooth muscle don't really have. Skeletal muscle helps us to maintain posture. It helps us, or it protects our movable joints. So skeletal muscle attaches around these joints and actually helps to not just protect the joint, but it stabilizes that joint. So it's a stabilizer. And then, of course, we have movement and no movement. So stopping movement is just as important as moving the body. What does skeletal muscle look like? So you all have seen muscle. You've seen muscles on my muscle models. You've seen your own muscles when you flex your arms in front of the mirror, stuff like that. You've seen muscle men and possibly muscle women as well. So you see the muscle under the skin. Muscles are composed of muscle fibers. And muscle fibers, depending on the muscle size, so larger muscles have hundreds of muscle fibers, whereas small muscles have just a few, like tens of muscle fibers. When we have those large muscles, those muscle fibers get bundled into groups, and those groups are called fascicles. Surrounding the entire muscle, we have a connective tissue wrapping called the epimysium. Epimysium is composed of dense, irregular connective tissue, and it actually runs all the way to the tendon. And if you remember, a tendon connects muscles to bones. It's composed of dense, regular connective tissue. Then surrounding the fascicle, we have a perimysium, which is again composed of dense, irregular connective tissue. And these connective tissues help to feed, so they help to bring in blood and nourishment, as well as protective white blood cells to the muscle. So if we pull out an individual muscle fiber from that fascicle, that muscle fiber is going to contain its own connective tissue wrapping composed of areolar connective tissue. And this is more of an insulator, an electrical insulator that protects the muscle fiber, or no, I won't say protects, it keeps the activity of that muscle fiber separate from the other muscle fibers. So when a stimulus occurs on one muscle fiber, it doesn't always occur on every other muscle fiber within that same muscle. So when any given muscle contracts, it's not all of the muscle fibers working at once. If that happened, then your muscles would fatigue way too fast and you wouldn't be able to walk or stand for hours on end. When you look even closer at the muscle fibers, so here you can see a close-up of a muscle fiber itself. Muscle fibers are composed of myofibrils. So this is one muscle fiber, this is a myofibril. Myofibrils contain multiple hundreds of proteins, and these proteins are arranged into structures that we call sarcomeres. So a sarcomere is the functional unit of a muscle fiber. And so here you can see a Z-disc, and here's a Z-disc. From one Z-disc to another Z-disc, we have a sarcomere. So along one given muscle fiber, we can have tens of sarcomeres, or even more. And do you see the lines that are found here? These lines are what produce the striations that we see within the muscle fiber. So you can see those striations on the muscle. Surrounding a single muscle fiber, we have the sarcolemma. The sarcolemma is the plasma membrane of the muscle fiber. And then attached to the muscle fiber and right next to that sarcolemma is the smooth endoplasmic reticulum of the muscle fiber that's known as the Sarcoplasmic Reticulum. It has its own job. It functions to harbor a lot of extra calcium. It binds calcium, holds the calcium inside until we need it. So here you can see the sarcomere up close and personal. And the sarcomere itself is composed of different types of proteins. So we have these darker purple proteins here. Those are called thick filaments, and thick filaments are mainly your myosin. Myosin has two different binding sites. It has an actin binding site, and it has an ATP binding site. Myosin kind of looks like a double-headed golf club. So one myosin head, or I shouldn't say that, I should say one myosin protein filament has multiple heads, and these heads are what contain those actin binding sites as well as ATP binding sites. There's also this green region over here, and if you look down here, that green region is composed of these bead-looking structures, almost look like, I always think of them as olives, because they have that little hole right there. That hole would be where like that pimento or cheese might be stuffed, depending on the type of olive that you get. Those molecules or those proteins are called actin. Actin and myosin are both contractile proteins. I'm sorry, I totally forgot the word I was looking for. Contractile proteins. And when they bind together, they cause a muscle contraction. Then we have other proteins. We have these tiny little blob-like shaped proteins, and then we have the string-like protein that you see here. The string-like protein is called tropomyosin, and the blob-like protein is called troponin. Troponin and tropomyosin sit on top of the actin, and those are regulatory proteins. So the tropomyosin covers the binding site that on actin that myosin typically will bind to. And so the only time we'll actually have a muscle contraction is if troponin and tropomyosin move off of the binding site on actin. So that's why they're known as regulatory proteins, because they regulate that muscle contraction. So I told you that muscles function mainly in a muscle contraction. I also said that skeletal muscle needs nervous innervation, which means we have to have neurons sending signals to the muscle. And so where a skeletal muscle is located, we have a for each fiber, we have a neuromuscular junction. NMJ means neuromuscular junction. And so this is where the neuron and the muscle fiber come in contact. So for each given muscle fiber, we have one neuron that will stimulate it. But one neuron can stimulate multiple muscle fibers. And the reason for that is at the end here, this is the axon, and at the end of the axon, we have multiple little terminals. And so each terminal, and you can see that right here, each terminal can innervate or can come in contact with a single muscle fiber or myofibril within a muscle fiber. Make sense? And so you can have one, and this can have, 20 or 30 different axon end bulbs, and they can innervate different muscle fibers. And so when you have that happen, you can stimulate some muscle fibers and then stimulate other muscle fibers, and this allows muscles to continuously be contracted. Does that make sense? And if not, come to school and ask me, all right? So I told you that the sarcoplasmic, or the sarcolemma was the plasma membrane of the muscle fiber, and that the sarcoplasmic reticulum was very closely attached to that sarcolemma. So here's what that looks like on a, well, so this is a diagram. This would be a microscopic level, obviously. So the plasma membrane wraps around the muscle fiber, and then we have these small invaginations of the muscle fiber, or of the plasma membrane. They move into the muscle fiber. Those invaginations are called T-tubules. We have attached right next to those T-tubules, we have sarcoplasmic reticulum, that smooth endoplasmic reticulum that carries all that calcium, or that holds all that calcium inside. So the three structures, the sarcoplasmic reticulum on one side and the other side, of one of those invaginations, the T-tubule, is known as a triad. So when the plasma membrane, the sarcolemma, gets stimulated, that stimulation moves along the sarcolemma and down into the T-tubule, and it actually activates the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And then the sarcoplasmic reticulum opens, releasing calcium to the muscle fiber cytoplasm, which is known as the sarcoplasm. You're getting this kind of sarco for muscle. I'm going to stop here so that I can go through the actual muscle fiber contraction in one lecture, and this has already went 20 minutes, okay? So you have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you in our next lecture. Bye.